is your job to put the country first and think beyond your own ego and your own interests and your own disappointments. My advice to President Trump is if you want, at this late stage in the game, to be remembered as somebody who put country first, it's time for you to do the same thing.
In your view, it is time for him to concede?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it was time for him to concede probably the day after the election.
Former President Barack Obama lecturing President Trump in a new 60 Minutes interview, pressuring him to concede, including right after the election when nobody thought that Trump should concede right away. But anyway, that's probably not going to happen. As the Trump team gears up for another week of legal battles, the president tweeted yesterday, Biden only won in the eyes of the fake news media. Lovely all caps. I concede nothing. We have a long way to go. This was a rigged election, also all caps. The president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, making the case on Fox News yesterday. The campaign does, in fact, have evidence to support their claims of widespread voter fraud, remaining confident that the election will be overturned. So where is this evidence? Let's bring in commentator and attorney Rogan O'Handley, the man best known as the guy behind DC Draino all over the conservative internet. Great to see you, Rogan. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me on, Buck.
So let's start, my friend, if we can, with, before we get into the specifics about different challenges in different states and how you see it going, and the fact that, of course, Barack Obama somehow knew before any of the networks even called it that Trump should have conceded to Joe Biden. We'll put that aside. Where's the fraud? You seem pretty confident, based on your public commentary on this one, that we're going to find some fraud. What makes you think that?
Well, the fraud is in the statistical data. It is extremely unusual and, in my opinion, evidence of fraud when hundreds of thousands of ballots are found for one candidate and almost zero for the other in the dead of night after we were told people were going to stop counting. Very shady. This is stuff we see in, third world countries. And now we are learning that Dominion software, voting software, which was shot down by Texas and other states for not being up to speed in terms of its security, was used in a lot of these battleground states where the votes, there's a lot of statistical anomalies that were all in favor of Joe Biden. So that, in addition to Pennsylvania, where they have just or will be filing suit this week, hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots were counted after Election Day in violation of state law, which some Pennsylvania judges tried to overrule right before the election. But the Constitution is very clear that these ballots, hundreds of thousands of them, are unconstitutional. And I'm hoping that the Supreme Court, in at least a 5-4 decision, votes to throw them out. Otherwise, we are incentivizing lawlessness.
President Trump tweeted out the following about the Georgia recount that's already been happening. The fake recount going on in Georgia means nothing because they're not allowing signatures to be looked at and verified. Break the unconstitutional consent decree. Rogan, what's going on here?
Well, there's a very close race in Georgia, and President Trump is right that the consent decree may be unconstitutional. It was a legal agreement entered into by the Secretary of State of Georgia, who is a Republican, before the election. And again, it controverts established state law on election procedure. What we're seeing across the country, especially in these battleground states, are these equitable adjustments to state law in light of the COVID dynamics we're seeing across the country. Those were the justifications that were used to enter into these, non-state law agreements. And the Supreme Court is going to be taking a look at them. The Constitution is very clear. Only the state legislature can set election law. And so when you have these state level bureaucrats and other people entering into these agreements that circumvent state law, in my opinion, we're going to find out that those are unconstitutional. And the amount of ballots it affects, especially in a close race like Georgia, could ultimately turn the state back in the Trump column.
So part of this then, just for everyone to be clear as you're talking through this, part of it is that the unconstitutional actions in states based on what they felt were COVID exceptions could result in a court saying sorry, you weren't allowed to do that in the first place, and then they would toss out all these ballots. Do you think that there are courts that might be willing to do that, even if that's what the law says?
Well, we're going to find out. I tend to think that the Supreme Court is more removed from the local hysteria in each state that may pressure them to decide a certain way in light of, what we're seeing, intimidation and threats against some of the Trump team's lawyers. One of their firms actually had to step down because of the intimidation and threats. But the Supreme Court, especially with ACB in a 5.5 to 4.5 majority, Justice Roberts is a little wishy-washy. I do tend to think that these types of decisions will overrule some of these bureaucratic decisions. And, you don't have to overturn too much of this. Not too many votes need to be thrown out, but we cannot have a system that incentivizes regulations and statutes that go around what the Constitution allows. And if we were to allow these types of votes, it sets an awful precedent for the future. So I think these justices are looking at the long-term picture, and they're going to decide rightfully that the Constitution was violated and that these ballots received after Election Day especially are not legal.
So you also had the MAGA march over the weekend. Were you in D.C. for this one, Rogan?
I was not. I was in Wyoming speaking to the National Summit of Young Republicans, all their state leaders, tremendous people. It was a tough decision, but I did believe that talking to state leaders, especially in these battleground states, was a very good use of my time and resources.
Because I know usually you're on the front lines of all things MAGA, especially at an event like this where you had so many thousands and thousands of people coming together across the country. I'm sure you saw some of the footage from the what people were calling the Million MAGA March over the weekend, and there was some violence that occurred. Not a surprise, but it was violence directed at Trump supporters from Antifa types. And here you go. Daytime, it's Trump supporters. Everything's fine. Everyone's peaceful, law-abiding, First Amendment. That's what's going on. Nighttime, all of a sudden, the Biden voters, a.k.a. Antifa, show up, and the mayhem breaks out. Rogan, what's going on?
Well, we all know that they weren't boarding up the windows because Trump supporters were going to riot. In fact, we've seen 2 weeks now of, dealing with a fraudulent election and have yet to see one riot or disturbance from Trump supporters. It's clearly from these leftist radicals that are being condoned by not only Joe Biden, but the entire fake news media ecosystem. And, there was over 100,000 Trump supporters marching in D.C., marching to say that they're upset. They know that this election was rigged and that we need to have illegal ballots thrown out. But these Antifa people, they're by definition terrorists. They're using violence and intimidation to attack Nana and other moms with kids in their strollers. It's you want to talk about who's deplorable? It's the people in the ninja costumes attacking people in the streets.
DC Draino, a.k.a. Rogan O'Handley. Rogan, great to see you, man. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me on, Buck.
Hey Team Buck, just want to say thanks so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more great content from The First, please click that subscribe button.